Most people who saw Vince Rourke sitting alone at the end of the bar at Mallory's Tap in Kingsburg, Tennessee, made one of two assumptions. They saw the patch and they saw the size, and they thought, dangerous. Or they saw the gray in his beard and the way he was nursing the same beer he'd had for 40 minutes without talking to anybody, and they thought, harmless. Both of those assumptions were wrong. But the only person in Mallory's Tap on a Friday night in November who was going to discover exactly how wrong was a 23-year-old in a pressed uniform who had walked in 30 minutes earlier and had been telling the room about himself ever since. He had picked Vince Rourke specifically. He had leaned across 2 empty bar stools and pointed a finger and said the words that a very small number of people have said to Vince Rourke over the course of a long life, and that an even smaller number have not regretted. You can't hurt me. You know that, right? Not a man like you. Not to someone like me. He said it like a man who had never once in his life been surprised by what happened next. What happened next surprised him considerably, but not in the way he expected, because the thing that ended it did not come from Vince Rourke at all. It came through the front door at 9:47 in the evening, and when it walked in, every person in Mallory's Tap, including the young soldier, finally understood what quiet actually means. Mallory's Tap had been on the corner of 2nd and Birch in Kingsburg for 26 years, and it had the specific character of a bar that had survived by being exactly what it was, and not trying to be anything else. Pressed tin ceiling, 12 stools, 4 booths along the wall, a jukebox in the back that still took quarters, and that someone had loaded with Merle Haggard and Waylon Jennings, and a surprising amount of Patsy Cline. The lighting was low without being dim. The beer was cold. The bartender, a woman named Greta, who had been working this room since the 2nd year it was open, had a memory for orders and a disposition that was warm to people who deserved it, and indifferent to people who didn't, and she had spent 24 years developing the judgment to tell the difference in about 45 seconds. The smell was hops and wood polish and something like old brick. The smell of a building that had been many things before this and still had all of those lives in its walls. It was a Friday, so there were 14 people. The booths held a couple in their 60s sharing a plate of fried pickles and talking about something that made the man laugh, and the woman shake her head in the way that means you have known someone long enough to be exasperated by them and have decided to stay anyway. 2 women in their 50s at the middle of the bar. Colleagues from the insurance office on Birch, sharing a bottle of wine and talking about something that they kept lowering their voices to say. A group of 4 men near the jukebox, construction workers finishing a Friday, wearing the specific tiredness of people who had been outside all day in November doing physical work and had earned their seat. Greta at the bar, and Vince Rourke at the far end, alone. Vince Rourke was 56 years old and had been a member of the Iron Road Brotherhood for 23 years and its chapter sergeant at arms for 11. And he was built the way some men are built, who have spent their adult lives doing things that required the body to be a reliable tool rather than a statement, wide through the shoulders, economical everywhere else, with hands that were large and scarred, and completely still on the bar in front of him. His beard was going gray, and his hair with it, close cropped, and he had a face that was not unkind, but was not open either. The face of a man who had learned that not everything happening inside him needed to be visible on the outside, and who had practiced that lesson long enough that it was no longer a practice. He had 2 patches on his cut that people noticed when they were close enough, the sergeant-at-arms patch on the right, and on the left, below the chapter rocker, a small rectangular patch in subdued colors that most civilians would not recognize, and that most veterans would, immediately. And that said things about where Vince Rourke had been between the ages of 19 and 28 that he had never once discussed in this bar or any other. He had come in tonight because he came in most Fridays, and because the alternative was his house, and his house had been quieter in a way he was still adjusting to since March, when his wife Karen had died of a cancer that had taken 14 months from diagnosis to the end, and that he had sat beside for all of it without flinching, right up until the moment she was gone, and the flinching started and didn't stop. He was not drinking heavily. He was drinking the way men drink, when the beer is a reason to sit somewhere with other people without being required to talk to them. He had not asked for company tonight. He had not asked for anything. Before we get to what happened, before we get to who walked through that door and why it changed everything, if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button and drop your city and state in the comments below. I read every single one. Every city, every state, every country. Now, back to Mallory's tap. Because the young soldier's name was Tyler Groff, and he had been in the building for 32 minutes, and in those 32 minutes he had established a very clear picture of exactly who he was. Tyler Groff was 23 years old and had been in the Army for 18 months and had shipped back from his first overseas posting 6 weeks ago, and he had come home to Kingsburg with the specific energy of a young man who has been somewhere difficult and has concluded from this that the world now owes him a particular deference that it is not yet fully paid. He was not a bad person in any permanent way. He was 23 years old, and he had done something genuinely hard, and he had not yet learned the difference between having done something hard and being someone who could not be challenged. He was also, on this particular Friday night, 3 drinks into an evening that had started at a different bar, and the 3 drinks had done what 3 drinks do to the version of a person that is most interested in being seen. He had walked into Mallory's tap in his dress uniform, not because he had come from an official occasion, but because he had found, in the 6 weeks since his return, that the uniform produced a specific kind of attention that he had come to rely on. People looked. People thanked him. People moved out of his way. He had not examined this closely enough to notice that what he was doing was borrowing gravity from the uniform rather than generating it himself, because 23-year-olds who have not yet been wrong about anything important rarely examine their sources of gravity. He had worked the room from the door. The couple in the booth had thanked him for his service, and he had accepted this the way he accepted most things now, as his due. The women from the insurance office had smiled at him, and he had smiled back and said something that made one of them look at the other. The construction workers had nodded at him with the specific nod of men who recognize physical work and leave it there, which was not quite the response he was looking for. So, he had moved on. He had gotten a drink from Greta, who had thanked him for his service in the same tone she used for everything, which was the tone of a woman for whom the words meant something and were therefore not performed, and this had not registered with Tyler as the compliment it was, because he had wanted something more demonstrative. And then he had seen Vince Rourke at the end of the bar. He had seen the patch first. He had seen the size of the man. And something in him, something that was 23 years old and 3 drinks in and looking for a way to be the largest thing in the room, had made a calculation that he would spend the rest of this night revising. He leaned across the 2 empty bar stools. He said something about the patch. He said something about bikers. He said it with a smile that was meant to be charming and landed as something else. Vince looked at him once and looked back at his beer. Tyler had taken this for discomfort. He had leaned a little closer. He had said, loud enough that the construction workers near the jukebox could hear, "I just want you to know, you can't hurt me. You know that, right? Not a man like you. Not to someone like me." Greta had stopped wiping the bar. Vince Rourke had not moved. The room had changed when Tyler said it. Not loudly. It was a quiet change, like the pressure change before weather, something the body registers before the mind names it. The couple in the booth had stopped talking. The women from the insurance office had gone still. The construction workers near the jukebox had not looked over, but two of them had stopped moving. Greta set down her cloth. Vince Rourke picked up his beer. He took a drink. He set it down with the same care he had set it down 40 minutes ago when he first arrived. He looked at the bottles behind the bar. He did not look at Tyler. Tyler had expected a reaction. He had gotten none, and the absence of one was, to a 23-year-old who needed an audience, more provoking than a response would have been. He moved one stool closer. "I'm serious," Tyler said. "I've been through things you can't imagine. I've done things." He paused here for a word that would convey the weight of it without being specific about the weight of it. "Things that would change a man like you. And I came back. Because I'm built different. So whatever you think that patch means, I just want you to understand, son," Greta said from behind the bar. Tyler looked at her. "You should stop," she said. She said it plainly, without heat, the way a woman says something she means exactly once. Tyler looked at her and then back at Vince. "I'm just talking," he said. Vince Rourke had still not looked at him. He was looking at his own hands on the bar. Large hands. Completely still. The kind of still that is not the absence of movement, but the management of it. Tyler took the final stool between them and leaned forward on his elbows. He lowered his voice into the register he used when he wanted something to feel significant. "I look at you and I see a guy who probably thinks that patch means something in the real world," he said. "But I've been in the real world, and I'm telling you as someone who's been there, you can't touch me. There is nothing." Vince turned and looked at him. Just that. Turned and looked. Tyler stopped talking. He stopped because of the eyes. Not because they were angry. They were not angry. They were the opposite of angry. They were completely calm in the way that very deep water is calm, which is to say they contained things that were not visible from the surface, and the surface itself gave no indication of the depth. Tyler had been looked at by a lot of people in his 23 years. He had not been looked at like this. The bar went so quiet that the Patsy Cline song from the jukebox, which had been background, was suddenly the only sound in the room. Vince said nothing. He held Tyler's eyes for 4 seconds. Then he turned back to his beer. Tyler opened his mouth, closed it. His face had done several things in rapid succession that he was not aware of. He straightened on the stool. He put a hand flat on the bar, the gesture of a man re-establishing something. "I just mean," he started. The front door opened. Nobody in Mallory's tap heard the door. They felt it. The cold air from outside came through first, the November cold off the street, and then there was the sound of the door closing, and then a silence that was different from the silence that had been in the room, fuller somehow. The silence of a room that has just realized it is not the same size it was a moment ago. The man who came through the door was 64 years old and 5'10" and 175 pounds. And he was not large by any visible measure, and he did not need to be. He wore a canvas jacket over a flannel shirt and work boots that had been waterproofed recently, and he had a face that was lean and weathered, and absolutely still in the way that faces become still when they have spent enough years in conditions that do not allow for unnecessary expression. His hair was white and short. His hands, as he pulled off his gloves and tucked them in his jacket pocket, were the hands of someone who had used them for specific and practiced purposes for a very long time. His name was Frank Delacroix. He had retired from the United States Army Special Forces 12 years ago after 31 years of service. the last 14 of which he had spent as a master sergeant in 7th Special Forces Group, and before that in places that had no names in any official document and that he had never been asked about in Mallory's tap, because Greta had known him for 16 years and understood that the people who have actually been to the places that matter are never the ones who talk about it. He came to Mallory's on Fridays when he was in town. He had a standing order. Greta had it started before he reached the bar. He sat 3 stools from whatever end was quieter. He came through the door, and his eyes did what his eyes always did, which was move through the room in a single unhurried pass that cataloged everything in it before he had taken 4 steps. He saw the couple in the booth. He saw the women from the insurance office. He saw the construction workers by the jukebox. He saw Greta with her cloth in her hand and her expression. He saw the young man in the dress uniform. He saw Vince Rourke at the end of the bar. He walked to the bar, unhurried, and he settled onto a stool 4 seats from Tyler, and Greta set his beer in front of him without being asked, and he wrapped both hands around it. He looked at Tyler. He looked at Vince. He looked at Tyler again. "Vince," he said, without turning his head. Vince looked over. Frank's expression did not change. There was something in it that arrived slowly. A recognition, not of what was happening now, but of something much further back. Something between the 2 men that had no words in this room and didn't need any. "You all right?" he asked. Vince said, "I'm all right." Frank nodded once. He drank his beer. He set it down. He looked at Tyler with the particular attention of a man who is measuring something and taking his time about it, and Tyler, who had been looked at by Vince Rourke in the previous minutes and had found it unsettling, now discovered that being looked at by Frank Delacroix was an experience in a different category entirely. It was not threatening. It was precise. It was the look of someone for whom all the available information about a person is simply information, to be gathered and assessed without heat and acted upon if necessary. "You're in the Army," Frank said. "Yes, sir," Tyler said. The "sir" arrived automatically, before he decided to say it. Frank looked at the uniform. He looked at the ribbons. He looked at Tyler's face. "How long?" 18 months. Frank nodded. He didn't say anything for a moment. He looked at his beer. "You said something to this man," Frank said. He did not look up. "What did you say to him?" Tyler's jaw moved. It wasn't a threat. I was just saying, what did you say to him?" Not a question this time. A space left open that needed filling. Tyler said it. The same words, quieter this time, stripped of the performance. "You can't hurt me. Not a man like you. Not to someone like me." Frank listened. He was quiet for a moment after. He turned his beer glass a quarter turn on the bar. "You know who this man is?" Frank asked. Tyler looked at Vince. Vince was looking at his beer. "A biker," Tyler said. Frank looked at him. He didn't answer immediately. The Patsy Cline song ended. The jukebox cycled. There was a moment with no music. "Vince Rourke did 3 combat deployments," Frank said. 2 in the Gulf. 1 in Kosovo. He did them before you were old enough to understand what a deployment was." He took a drink. He set the glass down with care. He came back with things in him that didn't have names yet, because we didn't have names for them yet in 1997. He put those things somewhere, and he went to work, and he raised 2 kids, and he took care of his wife for 14 months while she died, and he didn't make a sound about any of it. He paused. Any of it. Tyler had gone very still. Frank looked at him. Not with anger, not with contempt, with the same precision he had used to look at everything else. "You've been in 18 months, he said. "You've done something hard. That's real. I'm not taking that from you. He looked at his beer. But hard isn't the same as finished, and finished isn't the same as knowing. He was quiet for a moment. This man knows things you haven't started learning yet. He picked up his beer. He looked at Vince. The patch, Frank said. The one on the left side, under the rocker. He looked at Tyler. You know what that is? Tyler looked at Vince's left chest. He looked at the small rectangular patch in subdued colors. He looked back at Frank. His face had changed several times in the last 2 minutes, and was now doing something it had not done in a long time, which was waiting. That's a 75th Ranger Regiment combat patch, Frank said. He earned that before he was 25. He finished his beer. So when you say he can't hurt you, he set the glass down. Think about what you're actually saying. The room held its breath. Tyler Groff sat on the bar stool and looked at the patch he had not recognized on the chest of the man he had decided was the least dangerous person in the bar. And he felt something happen in him that had not happened very often in his 23 years. The specific vertigo of discovering that the story you have been telling about yourself has a hole in it that you cannot immediately calculate the size of. He didn't speak. Vince Rourke was looking at his hands on the bar. He had not looked at Tyler since he turned away. He did not look at him now. Frank Delacroix put on his gloves. He looked at Greta. "Put his on my tab," he said, with a small nod toward Tyler. "And Vince's." Greta looked at him. "Frank, his wife passed in March," Frank said quietly. "It's November." He looked at her with an expression that closed the subject without hostility. "Put it on my tab." He stood up from the stool. He looked once at Vince, who had not moved, and he said, "Heading over to the chapter tomorrow morning. Ride out with us if you feel like it." Vince looked up at him. Something crossed his face, brief, controlled. The kind of thing that a man who has spent decades managing his expression allows himself in the company of someone who already knows what it means. "What time?" he said. 7, Frank said. Vince nodded. Frank buttoned his jacket. He looked at Tyler once more. Not a long look, just the final look of a man completing an assessment. And then he walked to the door and pushed it out into the November night, and the cold air came through once, and the door closed, and he was gone. The room came back to itself slowly. The jukebox found its next song. The couple in the booth resumed their conversation. Greta moved down the bar and began wiping glasses with an efficiency that had nothing to do with the glasses and everything to do with having somewhere to direct herself. Tyler Groff sat on the stool for a long moment without moving. His beer was in front of him. His hands were flat on the bar. He was looking at the space where Frank Delacroix had been sitting, and then he looked at Vince Rourke, who was also looking at that space. He said, "I didn't know." Vince looked at him. Not the way he had looked at him earlier. The earlier look had been the look of a man deciding how much something cost and finding it not worth paying. This look was different. It was quieter. "Most people don't," Vince said. Tyler looked at the bar. He picked up his beer. He set it down without drinking. He said, "I'm sorry." He said it with the particular care of someone who has said the word before for small things and is now saying it for something larger and can feel the difference. "I'm sorry for what I said." Vince said nothing for a moment. He turned his glass in his hand. Outside on 2nd Street a car went by, the sound of it muffled by the old brick walls. "You'll be all right," Vince said. It was 5 words. It was not absolution. It was not comfort exactly. It was the statement of a man who had made it far enough to know what far enough looked like, and who was willing to say so to someone who hadn't found it yet. Tyler nodded. He picked up his beer, and he finished it, and he left a 20 on the bar, and he put his cap on, and he walked out the front door, and the cold hit him when he got outside, and he stood on the sidewalk for a long moment before he found his car. Greta did not charge Frank Delacroix's tab that night. She closed it out herself and wrote a note about it in the ledger she kept under the bar, not because she had to, but because she was a woman who believed that some things deserved a record. She had known Frank for 16 years, and she had known Vince for 12, and she had sat in this bar through the deployments of a dozen men she, recognized by their orders, and watched them come back and try to find where they'd left themselves, and she had not ever once told any of them that she understood what they'd been through, because she didn't, and she knew it. What she did instead was remember their orders and keep their tab and not ask questions, and she had been doing it for 24 years, and she intended to keep doing it for as long as the bar was hers, and she was in it. Vince Rourke left at 10:15. He put on his jacket and settled the collar and laid his money on the bar and looked at the room once, the couple still in their booth, the jukebox between songs, the low warm light on the pressed tin ceiling. And he said goodnight to Greta, and she said goodnight to him. And she watched him through the window as he walked to the Harley parked at the curb and pulled on his helmet and sat there for a moment, not starting the engine, just sitting. November Karen had loved this month. She had said once that it was the only month that looked the way it felt, which was gray and honest, and she had meant it as a compliment, and he had laughed and she had laughed. And that was Karen, the kind of woman who made you laugh in November and meant it as a compliment. And he had been laughing with her since 1994, and now it was November, and he was not. He started the Harley. He pulled out onto 2nd Street, and the cold air hit him through the visor, and he went south through Kingsburg toward the house that was quieter than it used to be. And he thought about 7 in the morning and the ride out, and the brothers who would be there, and the road that did not ask what you were carrying, only that you were on it. There are men in this world who carry things that have no names. They carry them in pressed tin bars and in long silences and in patches on the left side of a chest that only some people know how to read. They do not ask to be seen. They are not looking for thanks. They are just trying to get from one November to the next without making more noise about it than necessary. And sometimes, on a Friday night, a young man walks in who doesn't know yet what he doesn't know, and instead of anger, he gets something more useful. He gets the truth, delivered quietly by someone who has been exactly where that leads. If this story stayed with you, if you believe that the quietest men in the room are sometimes carrying the most, hit that like and pass this on to someone who needs to remember it. Subscribe so you never miss what comes next. And drop a comment below. Have you ever misjudged someone completely and been grateful for what you learned? Type quiet in the comments if this one found you tonight.